Thank you for joining us, everyone. We're going to get started in just a moment. Good evening, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator at McNally Robinson Booksellers in Winnipeg, Manitoba. We're broadcasting tonight from Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We are gathered here tonight virtually, both here in Zoom and on YouTube, now and in the future, to celebrate Disorientation, Being Black in the World by Ian Williams. This event is being co-presented with our good friends at the Winnipeg International Writers Festival. You'll be hearing from their festival director, Charlene Deal, later on, and we couldn't be more pleased to be bringing this evening to you. Your host for tonight, whom I'll be introducing in just a moment, is Chimwemwe Undi, and this is just such an incredible collision of two polymaths, poets, thinkers. It's going to be fantastic, and we're so excited that you can join us both now and in the future, as this video will remain live if you'd like to watch it again or share it with anyone. It'll just be on our YouTube channel. Just a few things to point out before we get started. Is that we do have live captioning enabled for this event. It is unfortunately the automatically generated captions that Zoom generates, which are imperfect, but they are available. So I just put some information in the chat about that. Feel free to click on the button just at the bottom if you do need to access those at all. Copies of this book, signed copies, in fact, are available from McNally Robinson Booksellers. So we would encourage you to get in touch with us if you would like a copy. And you certainly should take advantage of that. I'll put that information in the chat in just a moment, but they are available in person, over the phone, online, and we also deliver both locally in Winnipeg, straight to your door, and deliver via Canada Post as well. So one way or another, we'll find a way to get a copy of this incredible book, Disorientation, into your hands. Please do feel free to chat amongst yourselves in the chat. It is enabled. At the close of the night, I'll send all your positive things along to the panelists if you have anything to say to them directly. The other thing I should point out is that there will be time for a public Q&A later on as well. So just to ensure that tonight's moderator can actually find all the questions very easily, we would ask that you just please enter those questions in the Q&A box, which you'll find just at the bottom of your screen right there. Rest assured, entering a question in there will not interrupt us at all. So please feel free to write the questions in there as they occur to you over the course of tonight's conversation. And given that this is going to be such an incredible conversation, I will not take up much more of your time. Instead, what I will do at this point is just introduce both of the participants this evening and then turn things over to them. So your host, Chimwemwe Undi, is a poet and lawyer based on Treaty 1 in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Her writing and performance has been featured by Brick, Border Crossings, The Walrus, and BBC World, among others. She's an editor for CB2 magazine and an alumnus of the Banff Emerging Writers Intensive, and an incredible poet both on the page and in person. Of course, our featured guest tonight, Ian Williams, was born in Trinidad and raised in Canada. In 2019, he won the Scotiabank Giller Prize for his first novel, Reproduction, which was published in Canada, the US, and the UK, and translated into Italian. His poetry collection, Personals, was shortlisted for the Griffin Poetry Prize and the Robert Croach Poetry Book Award. His short story collection, Not Anyone's Anything, won the Danutta Literary Award for the best first collection of short fiction in Canada. His first book, You Know Who You Are, was a finalist for the Relit Poetry Prize. Williams holds a PhD in English from the University of Toronto and has recently returned to that university as a tenured professor, after several years as a professor of poetry in the creative writing program at the University of British Columbia. His third poetry collection, The Incredible Word Problems, was published by Coach House Press in the fall of 2020. And I will say once again how exciting it is to have two poets talking about the subject matter this evening. And of course, Disorientation itself is a finalist for the 2021 Hillary Weston Writers Trust Prize for Nonfiction. So without further ado, please join me in virtually welcoming both of tonight's guests.
You see me and hear me?
I can see and hear you. That's really sweet, John.
Yeah,
Hi.
that was a lovely introduction. Thank you. I didn't write the part about me being a good poet into my own bio. That might have been a little bit excessive. So, Ian, hi. Nice to
Hi, good to meet you.
get to meet you too. I think
Hmm.
usually on these panels people pretend to have met each other before, but we've never actually met before.
No, this is genuine truth here, pure cold. First time meeting you. Looking forward to it.
Yeah,
Hmm.
looking forward to chatting. I understand you're going to start with a little reading. Have you?
Right. So, Chim, I've been going back and forth about what to read tonight, and our little conversation in the virtual green room here sealed it. So I'll read about 5 minutes, a part about vacations and being elsewhere. This is from the section of the book where I talk about moving. And this section, I like the croissant and the baguette, haha. One of the perks of this new job in Toronto is that I get a research leave after 1 year of work. I've worked 15 years without a sabbatical. To put that in perspective, professors get a sabbatical every 7 years, meaning I'm twice overdue. I'm thinking about moving to France. I know I haven't even moved to Toronto yet, so this restlessness is premature, but hear me out. I have no ties in France, meaning I could live anywhere, not just Paris or Marseille. I could buy a super cheap place somewhere secluded, a hamlet overlooking a field. I'd be the only living thing in the house. There'd be arched mouse holes in the baseboards, but no mice. I would make myself into the ogre of the hamlet. Just skip forward a little bit. I talk about all of the creative people who lived in France. And then I hit this realization here. Is the current Francophilia just displaced Anglophilia? Is any attraction toward a European colonizing power a cover for self-loathing? I'm not online researching houses in Morocco or Haiti or any former French colony with Black people, though I'd be less conspicuous in these places. I would never be an ogre among Black people. Yet I instinctively cast my future self as an ogre in France over a human in Guadeloupe. Is it possible that I can no longer live outside white contact, even at the price of a reduced life? It troubles me that an unexamined good life, for me as a Black man, means living alone or living white. Furthermore, the effect of living in the West for so long is that isolation in the name of sanity is easier than integration. My desire for France deflates upon this realization. I imagine the neighbors chasing me through the village with pitchforks, crying out, "Nègre, nègre." And when I correct them in my timid French, they are unable to see me as having more than an infant's intelligence, which in their opinion is more confirmation than rebuttal of what I am. I close my laptop for the night. I'm ashamed to say it, but a few days later, I'm back on the French real estate site. I think I've figured out what's so appealing. As a Black man in France, sure, I'd be more visible, even more detectable because of my nervous French. But the flip side of that hypervisibility is that I'd be forced to reduce the surfaces of contact with the outside world. My language skills would prevent me from any engagement with complex subjects, would render me unable to hear, except by tone, the disapproval expressed about my being. I make myself a cute little avatar on the French real estate site. I choose my hair, my eyebrows, my complexion, my clothes. I set up alerts for isolated properties. I save properties to my favorite. I I wind up the courage to write the real estate agent in French for more info. No answer. I write other agents. No answer. I write one agent 3 times through different channels and no reply. Out of a dozen queries, I get 2 replies. Maybe it's a sign that I shouldn't spend my savings on becoming an ogre. So I'm writing all these agents and not getting much feedback, which makes me wonder, is there so much demand for these properties that potential buyers can be ignored? No, the houses stay on the market for a long time. Is my French incomprehensible? No, my partner proofread some messages. Is there a strike in France? Is it because I mentioned I was Canadian and they didn't want to deal with foreign speculators? Is my name too English? Is there something wrong with me? You see how events that might seem innocent to white people always have another layer with us. Maybe my avatar with the dark skin might be causing realtors to ignore me. So I go back to my profile and choose new skin, eyes, and hair. Presto, I am now a white man. This is my version of the dating site experiment where a Black woman used the same description but different names and profile photos. Hadia as a Black woman versus Jessica as a white woman. You can guess which profile attracted more responses. But I can't go through with the race baiting. I just can't. Within a day, my moral senses are tingling. Race switching feels dishonest, no doubt, but mostly it feels like a betrayal of my own life and my people in the name of experiment. In the end, I erase my face altogether. After becoming invisible, surrendering myself to the imagination of the realtors, whose default client would probably be white, I get two responses. Quick and casual, to be fair, but still, someone saw me. That's what I became.
Okay. I know you were having a hard time picking what you were going to read.
Right.
I'm so glad that you picked that. Well, I'm glad and not glad because now I just have like so many questions. If you see me looking down, it's because I'm a millennial and so I have a giant iPad that I'm like scribbling.
Got it.
But something that really struck me about that passage when you were reading it, and something I think like worth mourning, is how both colonialism and white supremacy and racism and being alive to those things robs you of the ability to be just open to the world, right?
Yeah, it steals your spontaneity, right? That, an experience can happen, and I think a lot of white people can just let it go after it happens. But if there's any whiff of like uncertainty or discomfort or unpleasantness in an experience, we have to reprocess it and rethink it and relive it and try to understand it as, sometimes a safety mechanism for the future, right? How can I avoid this happening in the future? And sometimes just to live in an examined life. So yeah, you're right. It would be great to be spontaneous. And it would be great to think that, oh, I'm getting ignored, not for any kind of racial reason with my avatar. I'm getting ignored because, properties are hot in the Pyrenees, but we know it's not that simple. Yeah.
Yeah, and that sense is both retroactive and that you have to revisit everything that happens to you, everything that you encounter, but also it's forward-looking, it's prospective when you're thinking about the kind of the idea of moving to France, which I understand that you are doing or have done anyway. But just the idea of packing up your stuff and moving to another place is so limited.
Yeah, I don't know if you feel it, Chim, but pinched on both sides, right? Pinched by the past and pinched by the future. And this kind of low-grade dread that something is going to happen today that's not going to be very enjoyable. And I know that happens to everybody, right? I know that happens, you just don't feel like going to work today or whatever. But it's another thing if you don't feel like going to work today, because something that happened to you at 12 is still like acting on you, right? Or because a comment or some look that you got, 3 weeks ago on your way to work is still with you. Yeah, to be so controlled by the past and then this dread of the future. There's really little space. It feels like those old cartoons where the walls are like closing in on you and you're trying to just keep your elbows out to stay alive.
And then also, it's my list of questions that I wrote down as you were reading. No, but also thinking about, and I love this idea of part of the motivation for moving somewhere where you're maybe not fluent in the language is that you can sort of hide inside of in eloquence, like to not be forced into conversation the way that you are, because you are a person who's able to articulate yourself in this language.
Yeah. Yeah, the desire for simplicity, right, is what's behind that. There's no push factor like booting me out of Canada or anything like that. This desire for to live where, to go back to that time, like when you were 6 years old and things were a little bit simpler, where, the friend on the street, you had an Indian friend on the street and a white friend on the street, and you guys got along until, maybe late middle school or something like that. But maybe there's this kind of wish fulfillment to go back to a simpler state of mind. And if I can scrub myself of language, then I scrub myself of like kind of semantics, right? And understanding and processing and all of that. It is sad though, right? This desire to be alone as the best possible life. And I've built that into a kind of armor in my own life, only now that I'm breaking down. But it was the safest place to be, right? The safest state to be in was to be alone.
That's so interesting, and so it's probably redundant to say that you've phrased something well, but so well put. And I'm thinking then about in the first essay in your collection, more than half of Americans can't swim. And I can read the passage that I'm referring to, but you talk about, and maybe I will pull up the passage here. It's on my tabs, page 8 of the copy that I have. Say, I categorize my experiences, but then I open my arms and they come waddling back to me, shedding labels, disheveled and unruly. I am not the blackspert. By renouncing expertise, I am not turning my experience over to other people. Blackness is not for white anthropologists or diversity trainers to determine. And why do you need an expert? Why do you need a race guru? You have a mirror. Why do you look at a photo of a cover model to make sense of your own face? You can see that it's tabbed in the copy that I have, because I was so struck by this rejection of being framed as an expert. It's a refusal of having to, and I know people talk about being an expert in your own experience, which is one thing, but then being cornered into becoming a sort of an avatar for the entire
right
space.
And the spokesperson, right? that real reduction. I don't want to be a role, anything like, forget even role model, right? I just don't want to be a role and have my life completely erased to me. There's something appealing about stepping into that, for sure, right? The simplicity of it. But ultimately, no, I want to be sort of complicated and messy and all of that stuff for myself. You know what? I don't even think we're expert in our own experiences, right? To be honest with you, it takes so long for us to even understand what our experiences mean, right? So something may have happened to me and I was present for it. I can recall and give you the events and all of that, but I can't actually tell you what it meant, right? Sometimes for years afterwards. So, and this kind of external expertise, I'm not a big fan of like other people proclaiming truth and stuff to us, right? I think people need to find their own and do that work.
Yeah, that's really interesting to me, because I also think about my own experience of sort of being a black person, a black woman, and something that I experienced when I got to university was that I accessed language that explained a lot of my own experiences to me, but that had a sort of a complicated role in that one, that sort of academic critical register sort of puts you at a distance from the people that I would hope the language would benefit, and then also puts you at an increased, or increases, in my case, increased my exposure to the people who were subjecting me to the things that I was learning how to articulate.
Right. How ironic, eh? How ironic. And I feel this is way a lot about just kind of academic writing in general, right? You reach this level of like sophisticated expression or exposition, and it really only reaches people who can read that or understand that. One of the things I say in that first essay is that it's important to find your own language to talk about race, right? So not to borrow or not to accept these kind of catchphrases and these easy terms, but to speak about race and to speak about your experience in a way that is natural for you. And only then, because then that sort of marries the truth, right? If you are both true in your content and true in your expression, put together, that has a kind of sincerity to it. And then we can have real progress, right? But if I'm parroting back to you very safe and politically correct stances in language that, I can pull from like theory or pull from, popular culture, then I don't feel like we're sort of breaking new ground, or we're not really touching the heart of other people. We're just kind of politely sort of agreeing to an already established position, right? And what I want to know is, like, tell me about your racist grandmother, right? Tell me about the colorism that functions in Black society, right? Tell me about your relationship to your skin and your body. And tell me about, for white folks, the times when you, passed as Canadian, your people passed as Canadian, although you were really fresh Russian immigrants, right? Tell me about those things. And then we can really see each other, right? Not see these kind of clean, kind of academic manifestations of ourselves.
And you also talk in that essay, and I think sort of throughout the collection, about the what I'll maybe call the fear of the wrong language, of saying the wrong thing, of putting that earnest and earnestly articulated experience into the words that are not the words that we're supposed to be using right now. And I'm wondering what effect you think that has on the way that these conversations are happening, if they're happening.
Chim, this is probably your domain here, right? in law here. I mean, this territory between like justice and punishment, I think they've kind of been equated, that to have justice means to have somebody punished, right? To have somebody, castigated. And I think, in fact, there's the space of trial that needs to be protracted, right, before that judgment falls. And so if we can let each other sit in the space of trial, of explanation and exploration, and trying to understand what happened, right, understand our perspectives and our roles in these things before pronouncing these judgments, I think there'd be less fear about our language causing us to be canceled, or our language just, being the end of us. And it's really pernicious, right? The moment that we stop speaking, the moment that we are afraid to speak, all sorts of power structures can step into that space. So I don't want us, as regular citizens of Canada, to buy into this fear of saying the wrong thing. Yeah, very dangerous, right? Very dangerous. It's not that by picking our words and speaking carefully that the danger will go away. No, in a sense, we're just kind of giving ourselves over. We're acquiescing to the power structures by not speaking at all.
That's really interesting. I'm first interested in the metaphor that you chose there of trial, because trial requires an expert. Like, the trial is to put conflicting stories in front of somebody who's imagined neutral, and imagined ideally actually an expert, but certainly sort of imbued with expertise.
Yeah. I mean, the issue is, where are we in the whole judicial process, right? Where are we in this trial? And I think it's so tempting to position ourselves as judge or jury
Hmm.
rather than um, on the stand or just in a box listening or somewhere else, right? We want to be the executor that makes the decision about who is right and who is wrong, and then to announce and pronounce judgment. Um, but the interesting spaces in the trial are those people on the stand, right? The witnesses and the series of witnesses that together will build a true story, not any individual expert, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
just one voice among many. And I think if we're all witnesses in this grand trial of the 2021 race relations, then eventually some kind of truth will emerge. And it's not for us to judge, right? It's just for us to bear witness. That's it.
Yeah, I'll maybe move away from this metaphor in a second, just because it's starting to feel like being at work. Um, um, but part of what I hear you saying, frankly, is that maybe in this metaphor, the colonial common law English court is not really the right process at all, right? There are um, you know, mediations and um, reconciliation focused restorative justice processes that I
Very
think we
good.
need
Very
to be
good. Yeah.
borrowing our structures from.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's not what I'm saying. That's what you're saying. And I agree with that. Right. I'm not going to take credit for that. Yeah. There are alternative models that are better than this. I'm going to punish you at the end of it. Right. At the end of it. And that, of course, motivates people to bend truth and present themselves favorably and do all this kind of like truth gymnastics. Right. But if the process were restorative, as you said,
Mm-hmm.
or illuminating or communal in some way, that would yield a totally different kind of buy-in to the experience of
Mm-hmm.
sharing our stories.
Staying with this, I mean, there's a number of essays in this collection, but staying with this essay, I'm interested in, you write that I have received the message that to be Black these days is to be perpetually outraged and distressed, fed up, tired. To be anything apart from that is treacherous and out of touch. And I think we've touched on that a little bit already, sort of by implication, but can you tell me a little bit more about this idea um, and sort of promoting the subject in that first sentence? Uh, from who or where is that message coming?
Right, right. You know, after every sort of tragedy that involves a Black person, there will be a Black talking head on TV or in or writing or on Twitter or where have you, um, with actually quite justified anger, right? I think we are allowed our anger. Um, so I'm not saying that, but I'm saying anger is not the response that everybody has to tragedy, right? Some of us lock ourselves away um, and, eat chips at midnight, right? Some of us, just skip work altogether. Some of us bail from life. There's so many responses to this. And I mean, it doesn't make great TV to show, a Black man in his bed at midnight, after some tragedy eating chips. Um, yeah, so there are all these other ways to respond, and I don't. It bothers me a bit that compounding the difficulty of being Black in moments of racial violence is this added guilt that Black people have that they should be doing more publicly, right? I think sometimes you just simply need to take care of your heart privately. Um, and there's a particular kind of pain, Chim, from being rejected, I think, by your own, right? Your family, your Black people, uh, what have you, because you don't respond in the same ways, because you maybe don't have what they perceive as fortitude or courage or what have you. Um, but we are not all wired the same way, right? And mm, our mourning and our activism take different ways. I want to create some space for those alternatives, right? The alternatives to the stuff that we see on media. What about the sort of private kind of activism that people are doing in their relationships and their families and with their in-laws and all of that, right? All of that is work that, it's pretty much invisible to the larger world, but no less important. Mothers talking to their kids, dads talking to their kids, talking to the kids who visit their homes. All of that is racial work.
Yeah, that is well put. And I'll say I watched your conversation with Desmond Cole, who is
Brilliant.
someone who I really brilliant and someone I really admire, and is that person who shows up to the meeting, interrupts the meeting, knocks down the door, and that's the kind of advocacy that I admire, but not one that I am wired to do. And I'm connecting that then to something that I've started to sort of understand in the last little while is that there are many different forms of advocacy, and teaching is one, I think, and in some very subtle ways, existing can be one. In your case, I'll say, not to sort of have a fangirl moment, but sort of seeing a writer write, a Black writer just write well and beautifully and interestingly, is as impactful, if not more impactful for me than a writer who is a talking head on the CBC every time that I turn on, because it reminds me that it is possible to be admired, not just for being Black, but for being, I don't know if I'm articulating this well, but just, for doing the work and putting the work in.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chim. It's good to hear. Good to hear that. And I mean, I can't say it enough that the very visible public advocacy is necessary, right? And I admire those people. Absolutely. I actually, admiration is too weak a word for what I feel about them. I just, when you worry or you fear for people in the future, you just worry, what is the toll that this is taking on you? If I am so, am I so brittle that I can't stomach even rewatching a clip of this? And yet you are talking about this every day, day in, day out. You deserve something for that, right? Deserve something for that. So lots of admiration to folks who are doing this. The talking heads on CBC, I admire them.
No, I agree, of course. And I have, frankly, I've been a talking head on CBC. And so for me, the, how do I put this? The curiosity is also goes the other way to people who sort of allow themselves not to be, not bullied, but cornered into the role of having to be the microphone and the megaphone and the spokesperson and the one standing up. And in my specific context on Treaty One, basically every sort of smart Black person I know is on the roster for being an expert, and that can feel extremely limiting. And so that's sort of where my comment is coming from.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that those Black people want to write about ballet, right? Maybe they want to talk about something altogether different, horses and dogs and all of that. So it's no service that the world is doing us by giving us a microphone to talk only about Blackness, right? To say that your value lies only in your experience regarding this particular area. That's no great favor, right? That's actually a great toll that it takes. I mean, the point of liberation when it occurs will be here's the mic and write about ballet and let's hear you talk about that, right? and only that. I love ballet, by the way. I've got fond memories of like Winnipeg Ballet School and stuff. So Royal Winnipeg over there. So I mean, those kinds of things. How can we are already sufficient and we're already enough. Um, but at what point do we overcome the limitations in people's minds that we're only valuable in terms of talking about one thing or a handful of things, right? So much more, so much more.
You're a poet.
Mm-hmm.
And
you're a good poet, according to John, right? Let's make that distinction.
Very...
Just a poet.
I'm just, I mean, I feel like I obviously knew that you were a poet before reading this book, but I can tell that you were a poet in reading this book, the sort of careful turns of phrase. And you have been writing about race through fiction and poetry for a while, at least. And I'm sort of curious about how it feels to write about race without those filters or facades or the sort of the distance, if I can call it that.
Right. Kind of neat question there. Because when I write poetry and fiction, like it's all saturated. There's still lots of race that happens there, but it happens in the way that it happens in everyday life. So when I talk about like disorientation here, I talk about like race coming to the forefront of my experience in the world. And really the space that I want to live most of the time is just me as a conscious and perceptive being, right? Experiencing and interacting with the world. And so I'm always like a bit slapped around when that experience gets colored by somebody else, right? When someone says, no, you're not just seeing something, but you're seeing something as a Black man. No, you're not just listening to the radio, but you should be listening to particular kinds of things on the radio, or like particular kinds of music. And in poetry, I mean, we can see that race, if it's like some kind of wavelength or something, sometimes it comes above the surface, sometimes it's below the surface, sometimes it's right on the median there. It doesn't always have to be at a high pitch frequency, right? On the nose, on the subject. But I don't think I could any more avoid it as I could avoid like my visible skin here, right? There's no hiding the impact of like race on my voice, right? The kinds of playful moves that I make and the kinds of setting readers at ease or challenging readers or tonal shifts and all of that construction comes out of my time here on Earth, right? I just had this like flash that, my time here on Earth is like limited, right? Like at some point we won't be here, right? And we're just going to be the records of these conversations here, Chim. But yeah, everything to this point has contributed to my voice, and it would be a disservice to kind of like erase that or to whitewash or to like remove Trinidad from my voice or remove Boy and Brampton from my voice in the service of being palatable or neutral or, I don't know, canonical or something like that. Impossible. Yeah, what's your take on it? When does it come to the surface for you? When does it go below the surface?
That's a great question. I find it really
your question. Way to pat yourself on the back there, right?
What a brilliant question that someone very smart came up with. Right. I was more buying time, but that's funny. No, I find it hard to talk about writing poetry because I think it's the same thing as for you. It's everything. It's filtered by everything, and when I have to sort of sit down and write in a different context, I feel like I'm tapping into a much more narrow or specific stream than I'm able to pull on when I'm writing poetry. Because I mean, when and what I love about writing poetry is that it's everything. Is that I can see somebody waiting for their bus or like this morning, I saw somebody sprinting across the street for their bus, and I thought, that's probably going to show up somewhere, right? That's what I like about it. And so in reading nonfiction where an essay sort of has, I imagine, I don't really write nonfiction, but I imagine you enter an essay thinking about a subject that you're going to focus on. It's so different to me from the experience of writing poetry.
Yeah, definitely conventions there, right, that are operating on you in nonfiction. But poetry has this way, I think, for at least me as a Black man, of returning my spontaneity to me, right? It's this kind of glint of life. You said you saw the woman running for the bus and you said that's poem worthy. And that real flash of life, where I'm not necessarily a body or anything, I'm just like consciousness apprehending my time on earth. That's the real sort of beauty of poetry. For me. And then, of course, all of the things you could do with language that are transgressive and wonderful that you can't do anywhere else. You can't have a conversation talking like some of my poems. You just right. So, right.
You can try. You might not have as big of a social circle anymore.
Right.
But
You just get the weird stank eye or something. So
yeah. Returning your spontaneity to you, I think, is such a great way of talking about that relationship. And even when I was talking about, seeing somebody running, the only reason that it occurred to me that would go into a poem is because I was thinking of the poem that it would go into. Much more commonly, I start writing and then something that I remember shows up in the poem, and I think I didn't know that was ever going to be of use, if I can call it use.
Yeah. And I mean, when you get really in the zone, right, in fiction, the same thing kind of happens, right? You see something in the world and the whole world seems to be like this centrifugal force, like spinning into your novel, centripetal, right? Spinning into your novel. And with poetry too, right? It's suddenly the world gets organized differently, right? For you, apart from like the logical and the reasonable. Suddenly that person crossing the street makes total sense in your universe, and it's just the person that you were missing in your life, right? And in your poem, and they don't know, they're just running for the 99 or whatever. Yeah.
Fascinating. And you mentioned fiction a little bit, and Charlene will tell you, so this is true, I'm not just making this up to kiss ass, but when she emailed me asking if I was interested in hosting this, I was like, yes. Reproduction is the book that I have gifted the most in my life, because I had this experience of reading it and and there's all sorts of play, which I love, so all sorts of play throughout the novel, and it gets to this point where the chapter is just so surprising and so odd. I can't even remember specifically what it was, but I remember having this experience of turning the page and being like, whoa, this is so cool. What is going on? That is so cool. And the same thing, it's true. And the same thing happens in the essay collection, where you're suddenly like, oh, there's pictures. Huh, I didn't realize. Or when you're talking, there's these graphics of individuals, I think, like people lined up, and it's so surprising. And I think, having surprise in a novel on the subject in this year, I think is
we keep coming back to this, right? This idea of like spontaneity and surprise, and I guess like pleasure beneath it, right? And it's almost like sometimes we need to manufacture our own surprises and manufacture our own joy if none is like forthcoming, right, for us. And so like there's this huge imaginative place that we need to develop, right? And so you see Black people doing it in music and in the early 20th century, and just we found spaces that were free, right? Like that didn't cost us, that we can occupy at any time that we wanted, that had no way of being, restricted or monetized or invaded. And in those spaces, those imaginative headspaces, we create music and writing and art and all of those things as a real rejection of the actual physical world out there, right? Of the hostility of the world. Um, yeah, there's a section in the book that talks about um, I don't know, I kind of want to read it. I kind of don't want to read it because then it's going to mess me up overnight, right? But that talks about um, like, do white folks consider, is the debate about blackness really a debate about people being human, right? And I actually don't think it is, right? I think it's a conversation or a debate about the extent to which a human can be debased and still be recognizable as human. And I think the flip side is also true, right? Out of the most like oppressed circumstances, there's still something in the human spirit that transcends it and can't be limited. And I think so much of Black experience that never gets Grammys or never gets a prize or whatever, just people living their lives and then passing into anonymity. So much of that has been a refusal to like surrender the human spirit, right? To surrender joy and spontaneity.
Yeah, across diaspora, I think Black people always find a way to play. Yeah,
right.
That's true.
And diaspora is important too, right? Mm-hmm. Right. Not to just believe like the North American Black is the Black for the universe, right? So, yeah.
I'm just noticing that I was supposed to start asking people for Q&A questions 2 minutes ago. I don't see any questions. I might be missing them. There are a number of lovely comments here, but if anyone does have any questions, please feel free. I'm going to ask about, I understand that your family immigrated in the late 80s from Trinidad. How old were you?
9 when we got here, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And how do you think that, not just being from or of Trinidad, but the experience of moving at that time in your life?
Yeah. It's so important, I think, to like know another place, right? It's such a gift, right? To know like a whole other system of how people behave and use language and celebrate, and that carnival, you just shut the country down for, a week in February, right? That doesn't happen here, right? Like Halloween is not the same as carnival, right? Yeah, to just have a totally different system is a really good gift. And it's something that both is like foundational to me and something that I go back to from time to time. And there's this sense that, when something goes wrong here, you think like, oh, that wouldn't happen over there, or they do things totally different over there. And the reverse as well, right? Mm-hmm. When you see some kind of like irritation in like Trinidadian society or something, you're like, that wouldn't fly over here, right? Can show up 2 hours late and like expect for things to run or whatnot. So this kind of like bouncing back and forth between, your very first experience of the world, mm-hmm. right? The way the world made sense to you at 8 or 7 years old, and the way you understand the world right now. I think a lot of people in this country do it, right? Constantly moving between their parents' experiences and their present experiences, or their own. Yeah. What are your thoughts on the migrant or the immigrant?
Sort of similarly, my family immigrated to Canada when I was 12, origin, and I grew up in Namibia in Africa, and my answer is frankly very similar. I think it made me notice things, and I attribute a lot of my interest in poetry, which I consider sort of a noticing art, to the experience of immigrating. Just being so clear to me from such a young age that things could be, and it sounds almost trite, but completely different. Just like right. This is not natural or normal. It's just normal.
Yeah. It gives you a flexibility of thinking, right? Because if you have no other pattern, if like North American society is the only pattern that you've received for what a life could be or look like, then already your options are restricted, right? You do. I say it every once in a while. I was thinking to Charlene, I think like I need to leave the continent every once in a while, right? And it doesn't matter like which other continent I go to, but you got to get out of like the familiar ways of thinking to like, first of all, sharpen you and remind you that, hey, um, the routine that you live is not in fact alive, right? There's something deadening about, your very safe and stable life. And to get lost in a city and to not find your way back and try to find food and all of those things, really important to do. And then to look at all of the people who live on a different continent, let's say Japan or whatever, and they've never even thought about your existence, right? And their families and their ancestors, they don't care a whit about you and your and your issues and your problems, and they seem pretty happy with that.
Yeah, I think it is quite a pleasure to go somewhere and be completely ignored, to be in a different city thinking this is so interesting and so cool, and have nobody even understand that you are having that experience.
Right.
Yeah.
So true. I saw something in the chat about Anonymous. I can bring Anonymous here. Anonymous is looking at me. I'm gonna get a prop.
Oh yeah.
Oh. So this guy here, this puppet here is Anonymous. That face. Right. And in the book, I talk about Anonymous migrating from Tunisia all the way through the US, across Canada to find me. And then we were separated while I was moving from Vancouver to Toronto. And this guy, this little puppet guy, my birthday present at 40, survived all of those moves, all the way from Africa to here. And so I promise I'm going to take care of him, right? He's going to be okay with me. So.
Yeah, I agree with the comment that was a beautiful chapter.
Oh.
Beautiful essay.
Yeah. I'm like cradling him here. Like this might be a sign of a deeper need in my life, maybe right now. But for what it's worth, he's okay.
Yeah, he looks great. Yeah, like John says, if anyone has any questions, I feel selfish taking up all of your time. So if anyone watching is interested, thank you for the excellent conversation. Felt like it happened in that hopeful restorative justice space. Do you think there are ways to open up that space in society?
So a question probably for both of us here from that person.
From Katie Welch. Thank you,
Katie. You know, what's risky about this restorative space is that we stand the risk of getting hurt in the process. So if I open up myself to these kinds of questions, let's say about like racist grandparents or whatever, I'm going to get hurt by that, right? I'm going to learn things that I don't want to hear. I'm going to, be in, see the world through someone's eyes that I really would probably be happier not seeing it. And then if my friend reiterates some kind of racist comment, and that restorative space calls for me to forgive them and give them another chance, and this happens perpetually, like, do you see the danger in it? Like, do you see the cost in it? And I mean, the question here is it worthwhile to keep forgiving people? Or at some point, do we say no? And right now, at like this point in my early 40s, I say it's worthwhile to keep forgiving, right? I don't know what I'll be like at 50, but I'm still of the hope that, people come around and people change. Yeah, maybe naive, maybe Pollyanna, but that's my hope.
Yeah, I think we're of a mind. I am endlessly and foolishly hopeful, and I hope to stay that way for a very long time.
Right.
I cannot remember what our time cues were specifically, so just seeing that it's 4 to 8, that flew by. It was a real pleasure to have this conversation with you, Ian. Nice to meet you.
Thanks.
And you too, Anonymous. Nice to meet you too.
Just there we go. All right. A little creepy. If someone tunes in at the end of this, there was like, then there was this little puppet involved.
Very confusing. Yeah, this was a real pleasure to have this conversation. Thank you for writing this book and for discussing it with us tonight. And I'm gonna throw it back to Charlene. Does that sound right? That's correct. Okay, great. I love to get an A+.
You definitely get an A+. Jim. Wow, what an extraordinary conversation. And I agree with you, Chim. That was the fastest hour I've experienced for quite a long time. Thank you, Ian, for an extraordinary book. Thank you, Chim, for your insightful reading of this book and these warm and open questions. I am carrying away these ideas about spontaneity and joy and about maybe something that is restorative for all of us, of actually just getting out of the way and hearing two brilliant writers and humans talk to one another with race as one of the overtones, but where there's not all the translating that has to happen. I think that has been really an exquisite experience as a listener. So thank you both for your generosity and openness with one another. It's been a wonderful thing to witness. And I suspect there will be more conversations to come. I just have that hunch. I'm so glad Anonymous showed up. There, I met Anonymous when you did that little video for us, Ian, and I've been kind of fond of Anonymous, so I hope I get to meet Anonymous at some point. And I think Anonymous deserves all the cradling that you're offering it. That's appropriate.
Okay.
I also do think that I do feel the concern that you're identifying about the vulnerability to being hurt, and I think choosing to write this collection of essays, choosing to write all of the books that you've written, you continually make space where we can encounter the way that you live and the way that you think, and this really deep humanity that informs your way of being. And yes, it does make you vulnerable, but it also is an extraordinarily enriching experience for all of us who get to read you, and maybe even a little bit more for those of us who get to know you as a friend. So thank you for your wonderful book. I would also just like to point out that we need to thank Penguin Random House Canada for publishing this fantastic book. And I hope everyone will buy it. I get to do a little plug for McNally Robinson, which is, I believe, maybe the best bookstore in Canada, at least. And yes, so please, if you're curious about these essays and want to read more of Disorientation, you can order that book from McNally. So we get to listen in on this conversation again via YouTube. I hate to say goodbye and farewell, but thank you both for bringing your best, beautiful selves here this evening and sharing it with all of us. And thank you to the folks at McNally for being our host. At the Writers Festival, we're so happy to be an ongoing partner in creating culture in this place. And it's so delightful in this time of Zoom that our sense of culture and community can be so extensive. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for a great conversation, and good night.